Thanks for joining us for today's interview with Hafsa Memon. We are, we've been connected probably for a couple of months now. In January, you started an internship program at the FFC Center. And as we moved into March, the developments with COVID-19 and the quarantine and the health crisis that hit the nation and internationally impacted our offices. And unfortunately, your on-site internship turned into a virtual internship.
Yeah.
And we had to adjust how we have been able to give you the experience and show you how a counseling center functions during a pandemic. And so go ahead.
Not what I thought this internship would give me, but it's been enlightening nonetheless.
Absolutely. Well, I wanted to ask you some questions and just get your take on how this has impacted you as a postgraduate student, what the process has been with applying for graduate school,
Right.
and anything else that comes up that might be a question that follows. So if you're ready, I'm ready to hop on into this thing. Would you be willing to share how old you are, where you graduated from, and your current role at the FFC Center?
Right. So I'm 22 and I did graduate UTD in May of 2019, and we're now speaking in about April of 2020. So it's been about a year since I graduated. And in that gap year, I've been sort of prepping for grad school, doing my GRE, doing my research, and my final step in my personal grad school plan was to get an internship to make sure that my resume for my grad school application looked really polished and focused, and also just to make sure that I was committing to the right field. So it's a little bit about me.
Absolutely. Well, we have definitely enjoyed having you be a part of our team for these last few months. What are your future aspirations?
I'm really just looking for a career that allows me to do a lot of good while also feeling emotionally fulfilled. And I think with the career you really love, I see it in you, Shahidra, with you enjoying counseling as much as you do, you've branched out from your practice and you have a nonprofit, and you also are doing your PhD. So to find a niche that you enjoy so much that you go beyond just maybe the money making aspect, but you make it more of a lifestyle choice, I think is something that I'm always pursuing. So
Absolutely. Well, this is definitely a field that it gives you an option to be as diverse over your career period as you choose. And as you are exploring this field, I've encouraged you to get a wide range of experiences and to read about different aspects of the counseling field, just so that you have a wider range of an idea of what is available to you. And really with psychology, the sky is the limit. Right. So I want you to share a little bit about how this quarantine and the coronavirus and how our world has changed, how that's really impacted you in your progression towards your goals.
Yeah, so it's been difficult, counseling in itself being a profession which is all about the manner in which you interact with people. So to convert this internship to something where I take phone calls and so on and so forth from my bedroom, that there's an aspect that's missing that I was fortunate to get in the first half of the internship, but it's been unusual coping without it. We were used to doing case studies with the whiteboard and the drawings in the meeting rooms, and so that's changed. I also feel like the grad school process has changed significantly. UNT in particular, they have a very competitive counseling program, and so it's kind of thrown them for a loop that they're not able to interview people face-to-face anymore. So they have requested a YouTube video, but I could tell that they weren't completely sure how to begin to navigate the field of doing applications from a YouTube video standpoint, because their prompt for what they wanted in the YouTube video was verbatim, word for word, copy pasted from the prompt for their personal statement. So I'm not sure if that was because they felt like their structured interview questions for an in-person interview would not work properly for maybe like a YouTube video, or I'm not really sure why they made that decision, but it's been odd on our end and their end. So
I'm sure. I'm
yeah.
sure the colleges have scrambled to try to figure out how to continue to still move forward and to continue to help students realize their dreams and get into this field. I do
Yeah.
feel as though mental health and the world of psychology is going to be in great demand. It already is, but as the world begins to open up, um, what you guys are experiencing right now on the front end of, really we're still in pandemic mode.
Right. Right.
As you go through these next 2 years, the research and how this affects your graduate school study, it'll be interesting to see how it's incorporated and how you will be able to use this experience, over
Yeah,
time.
as a sort of a neuroscience STEM major, I do see the implications already. I mean, my other students, my peers were just talking about how for the next 2 or 3 years, research money is going to be allocated so differently than it was before. We were really moving towards putting money into things that maybe we won't be putting money into those projects anymore. I think the focus will be more about disease control and so on and so forth. So I'm not really sure what that means for the future of STEM research and funding.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Have you learned anything about the mental health world that you didn't originally have knowledge of before COVID-19 hit the US?
I was kind of shocked to learn about how the operations of CPS have changed a bit in COVID-19 era. I didn't realize that. I think in terms of finding child abuse cases, that we do rely on community as such an important network to really sort of we ask other individuals to maybe call in with certain referrals, or when they see something, they say something, and to have that component missing because kids aren't going to school and so on and so forth is scary, and not really an effect that I predicted when I heard that we were all going into lockdown. I wasn't thinking, oh, what about the children? But I know CPS probably was. So that was new for me. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. I do know a little bit about CPS and how their system operates, and how it has functioned in the past under normal conditions, but under the level of stress that they were already under, in addition to the increase in reported child abuse cases, domestic violence in homes, how that's
Right.
um, not only changed how they do business, but it's also increased their workload and stress the system, I'm sure, many
Right.
times over.
Right. Yeah.
Um, yeah, was there anything else that you wanted to share that maybe you saw impact our center specifically, and how, we had to shift our ways of relieving or giving services to the community?
Yeah, well, I was shocked to see how well our clients took to telehealth services. So our practice, we don't want to ever stop seeing clients who need us. So we've transitioned to those telehealth appointments, those like super secure, HIPAA sort of compliant, like sort of video calls. And they've been going well. And I was sort of under the impression that maybe with that human factor missing, not being there in person, that maybe therapy wouldn't be as effective. But I've been talking to you, I've been talking to the other clinicians at our practice, and our therapy seems to be going rather well. So I was pleasantly surprised that we were able to make that transition fairly smoothly with the EHR that we use. So
Yeah, so telehealth has always been an option.
yeah.
It's been a rarely used option within the practice. I would say less than 10% pre-pandemic. After this period of time, I think from March through the top of maybe April, maybe the week of March, 2 weeks in March, as all of this started to roll out, we increased maybe 50-50, seeing
Mhm.
50% of our clients in office, then 50% online.
Mhm.
And then over, a 2-week time span going 100% online. So I do feel like that has been a common story across the country with clinics and IOPs, PHPs, counseling centers across the board who've wanted to keep not only their clientele safe, but also their staff safe.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
it's been interesting. We've had one of our therapists sort of give us some stories on where their clients have been internationally and what they've been doing locally, and instead of having to wonder whether each client who's coming in is safe to see, now we know that we don't really have to meet with any of them until we know everything is safe. So I'm glad we were able to make that transition work out so well.
yes, me too. Me too. As a young adult and as a future graduate student, how have you been impacted mentally, emotionally, physically by this time period?
I think there's definitely a shift in the way that I accomplish my goals. There's a sort of, I know that a lot of my friends and so on and so forth are graduating right now. And I personally, as this internship wraps up, I'm like looking for my next step. And there's a lot of, I guess, economic uncertainty in this era that makes it difficult to, like cruising job sites nowadays feels a little more futile than it used to, just because, I mean, you can submit the applications, but you never know the status of that companies, like how they're coping and how they're dealing with quarantine. I know some large Fortune 500 companies are going on full hiring freezes until quarantine is over, so it doesn't feel good as it trickles down to the behavioral and mental health fields. So just sort of, I mean, I think that nowadays I've been relying more on the connections I've made in undergrad and less on typical job websites to maybe secure further internships and jobs and so on and so forth, and just reaching out to people I've worked with in the past has been really helpful, but it's not what I thought, I would be doing at this point. And also just prepping for grad school once again with SMU. I know that they've chosen to hold a virtual orientation and group interview as opposed to an in-person. So preparing for an interview via Zoom is different than preparing for an interview in person, definitely. So
Yeah, well,
feels
thank you
different.
for sharing that. Yeah. What things have you been doing to help keep you motivated during this time?
I think it's really, really important, and I very much underestimated how important it is to stick to the basics. Simple things like making sure you maintain a very regular sleep schedule I mean, it's so apparent when you sort of start to let things slip. Maybe in the vein of being kind to yourself and allowing yourself to sleep later, so on and so forth, because it feels nice, but it just all that sort of racks up on you, and to keep yourself disciplined and focused even in the absence of having to get up and have a commute and go somewhere. I think it makes and you need to normalize kind of the situation as best as you can. So eating right, sleeping right, getting your physical activity, going on a walk, going on 2 walks if you need it, calling a friend, speaking with my old mentors, and just seeing how the projects I used to work on are dealing with quarantine is also made me optimistic that if my previous research projects can find a way to adapt, then so can I. So
Awesome. Awesome. Okay, last question.
okay.
If you could preserve 3 things in a time capsule to remember during this time that you would be able to revisit 20 years from now, what would they be?
That is a difficult question. I think because I think this question would have been very different maybe 50 years ago when you would have put like newspaper clippings in time capsule, but nowadays the news is so abundant and overwhelming. The last thing I want to do is print out CNN. So I think I would make it more personal to like what my quarantine experience was like. I I have been keeping a journal of sorts, but the diary that I keep is basically like notes on my phone. So I'm not really sure if I would print those out and stick them in there, if I would put them in a flash drive. But I think those memories. I mean, sometimes I'm not doing well. I'm like writing with catharsis. Sometimes I'm doing really well. I'm writing motivational things for myself to read in the future. So those would be really nice to have in there. And I think just photos of all of the sort of productive hobbies I've been using to sort of like bide my time. I know that in this digital age where everything we produce, all the content we make is very digital, it's really refreshing to get back to doing things with your hands. I've been like baking a lot of banana bread, sewing. I've been learning how to fold paper planes for the first time. So I think
Things
evidence
you
of,
didn't know you needed to know, right?
yeah, it's just that tactile sensation. It makes you feel more present and really good. So I think putting something in a time capsule to remind me that, you know, in terms of uncertainty, bake, sew, cook, you know. And then my parents, they've gotten super into gardening in quarantine, and it's been fun to watch them discover how to plant things. So I think maybe a pressed flower or two would be nice.
How awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking some time to chat with me. Is there anything else you want to add?
Interesting thing to maybe discuss is how you can process something like a quarantine on so many layers. I feel myself feeling personally sorrowful at the things that I will be missing out on due to quarantine, like trips I had planned and so on and so forth. But then like my friend's graduation, and but I think there's also like the bigger picture, like what's happening with unemployment. And I mean, I think like we have to be capable of processing this on like a personal, like checking your privilege even as you feel bad at the same time. I think those things can coexist. You can be fortunate in the fact that the most stressful thing you have to deal with is sitting at home and being bored, and also being able to be like, yeah, I'm bored, this kind of sucks. So those things go hand in hand, I think. So I just didn't realize that it could be so complex, the way that we emotionally process an event like a social quarantine. Yeah, I think that's all I had to say.
Yeah, well, that is a really good point to end on. And I think it's a great reminder for anyone who watches this video to be mindful of how not only are you personally impacted, but looking at it from a macro and a micro standpoint. That's one of my economic terms. I was never really good at economics. But looking at, you know, the bigger picture, what's the 30,000-mile view, you know, and what things can you express gratitude for
Yeah.
that can ease maybe the stress and the burden of this time. There's a lot to be grateful for, but there's also a lot to recognize that may impact how we function and how we live and breathe and do work and live throughout, you know, the rest of this year and beyond. So
Yeah, it's certain things I will never take for granted again. Little things like going to the mall and being around people. It's definitely something I didn't think that, you know, I needed to be so thankful for, that I am thankful for now. So,
well, thank you, Hafsa. I appreciate it.
all right then. I will see you soon.
Yes, take good care.
All right, bye.